Dysmenorrhea Project podcast. My name's Sangavi.
I'm Jacqueline, and we're two medical students who are passionate about women's health and want to take you all with us on our journey to learn more about this underrated side of medicine. In today's Muscleton episode, we will be exploring the health conditions which started the project and podcast in the first place, which is dysmenorrhea, and also known as period pains.
We will explore the two distinct types of dysmenorrhea, explore the startling statistics behind its prevalence, and dissect the root causes and symptoms that set it apart from ordinary menstrual cramps. We'll also go through ways to manage this condition, including any new research surrounding the topic.
But that's not all. To emphasize on patients' perspective regarding this subject, shortly we will have Adila, who will be able to share her personal experience with dysmenorrhea. So tune in to hear her compelling story and transform your understanding of this often misunderstood condition.
So, what is dysmenorrhea? Dysmenorrhea describes the painful cramping, usually in the lower abdomen, which occurs before or during menstruation. It can adversely affect a woman's quality of life and well-being to the point where it might even restrict their daily activities and cause absences from school or work. It is the most commonly reported menstrual disorder and affects 90% of adolescent girls and over 50% of menstruating women. Although the exact mechanism behind it is still not fully understood, someone please fund this area of research. It's believed to be associated with the increased production of chemicals known as prostaglandins, which are released during menstruation and stimulate uterine contractions. Dysmenorrhea can be categorized into primary or secondary dysmenorrhea. So we're not going to go into too much detail, but essentially primary dysmenorrhea often occurs in teenagers and women in their 20s. It usually occurs 6 to 12 months after you start your period and occurs in the absence of any identifiable pelvic pathology. Secondary dysmenorrhea can occur after several years of painless periods, and so it's more likely to affect women in their 30s and 40s. It differs in that it's caused by an underlying pelvic pathology, so this could be endometriosis or fibroids, for example.
We now have Adila, who is also a medic at Barts in London, who is also willing to share with us her thoughts on dysmenorrhea. Welcome, Adila.
Hi, everyone. Great to be here.
Yeah, nice to meet you as well. So could you please introduce yourself and tell us a bit more about your background?
Well, hiya, my name is Adila. I am a second-year medical student. And in terms of my background, I guess in terms of my health, I've had dysmenorrhea for the past, let's say, 6 to 7 years. And I actually have secondary dysmenorrhea, which kind of goes against your definitions. I'm a bit of an outlier, but I have had it around essentially in my teenage years. So I guess I'm a bit young, on the younger side to have secondary dysmenorrhea. But yeah, I've recently been diagnosed with fibroids, so I guess that is why. And yeah.
Yeah, that's interesting. So you've mentioned about like 6 to 7 years of you having this condition, right? Did you? Yeah. And how has this sort of impacted your daily life and well-being?
Ooh, that's a hard one. I feel like it impacts in so many ways that it's really hard to describe.
Mm-hmm.
I guess right now I'm on my period, so I can talk about how it's been affecting me recently. So yesterday I started, and I think the first thing that I noticed was the pain.
Mm-hmm.
The pain got to a point where I was just struggling to get through the day and struggling to focus.
Yeah.
Especially when I was carrying my bags and stuff with the back pain, it just made it really hard. And even just walking up a flight of stairs, which usually is quite easy, just got very hard. So I feel like it kind of impacts me quite a lot physically. Like even today, I just decided to stay home and not go into uni because I knew it would be too much for my body.
Yeah.
And in a way, it also affects different aspects. So like I found it really hard to go to sleep last night because of the pain. So I woke up all fatigued because I didn't sleep well. I kept waking up in the middle of the night, tossing, turning. And yeah, I think altogether it just affects you in so many ways, especially since there's a lot of mental fatigue with it. Since it's not something that's going to go away, it's something that kind of comes with you for a big majority of your life.
Yeah.
So yeah, I think it just affects people in different ways, but in different aspects as well.
So, for example, like, because we're now second-year medics, and workload is obviously building up. So, how do you feel like, does it affect your sort of uni life or maybe social life on those aspects because of this?
I would definitely say so.
Yeah.
I think it's quite upsetting to say, but there are a lot of times I've had to cancel on plans, cancel seeing friends because of my period pains.
Mm.
And even with uni, especially with keeping on top of work, that's a bit hard, especially when you can't focus because of the pain or you can't always attend sessions.
Mm.
Like even today, I mainly took the day off because I know I have to go in tomorrow.
Yeah.
So this is sort of my break
Yeah.
until we have the mandatory sessions, which I kind of need to force myself to go to and force myself to understand and take part. So again, it just kind of affects workload as well, since I do fall behind quite a bit because of my health. I
Yeah.
know it's so easy to fall behind, but
Yeah.
when it's something that continuously happens every month, or well,
It is a
almost every
bit
month,
like disruptive.
a bit disruptive to say the least.
Yeah. So talking about more when you started off knowing that you had this condition, what were some like initial signs or symptoms you felt like differed from a normal period pain, for example?
I think that's like a really interesting question because I didn't really know what a normal period pain was.
Yeah.
Especially when I was younger, all I had to go off of was the friends around me. Because again, my mom was going through menopause, didn't know much about her periods, and I don't have any like sisters to talk to. So all I had were my friends. But what I didn't know at the time was that all their periods were quite abnormal. So I was in an environment where one of my friends would faint on her periods. So she'd always have fainting episodes. Another one would have very long periods, as in they'd stay for months, and again was very concerning. She was a lot of medications. And I had another friend who'd barely get her periods. And my last friend, again, just had really painful ones to the point where she couldn't get out of bed. So I felt like my periods weren't that bad. Like compared to them, I felt normal.
Yeah.
But then slowly as I grew older, I kind of started realizing this isn't normal. Like there were a lot of signs that I slowly started realizing. I think I mainly realized during the COVID pandemic, especially during lockdown, because in a way, that sort of break where we were all stuck at home, I had no distractions, I had no work, I had no things to keep me sort of preoccupied, and all I could focus on was the pain.
Yeah.
And that's when I truly realized, because I remember just having such a severe pain flare up at home and realizing, wait, was it always like this? How was I managing before? And sort of thinking about it in that way, I felt like I would always make myself sort of grit my teeth and just carry on with the day, carry on with my work, because I felt as though period pain was a normal thing. Like everyone can deal with it. Why can't I?
Yeah, no, I think you raised an interesting point about just period pain in general, how the topic, even if it's not stigmatized, like the way you handle it is really determined by your environment. Like you mentioned, your friends and family, and it really can affect a person's experience. So I think that's just an interesting topic that we should all really be discussing more. How like it can really sort of affect not just your personal experience, but also how then you go on and try and deal with it, or if you're even trying to find a diagnosis if you think it's a problem at all.
I feel as though, especially in the media, it's quite normalized, which made it so hard for me to actually reach out for help, especially when you see period ads of women essentially doing all these fun activities like sports, etc., whilst on their periods, and it's an advertisement for pads or tampons. And I'm here like, I can't really get out of bed, let alone exercise, especially on my periods. So again, it kind of isn't the best thing for young women to see, especially when they're so uncertain about whether their pain is normal. Yeah.
And I definitely feel like in the society wise, there should be adjustments for that as well, since we have to go through this sort of every month, and some people have it more serious than others. Yeah, just a consideration as to like what can be done for women as a whole. Okay, so that's really good. So now moving on to your experience with healthcare. So at what point did you sort of try to contact maybe your GP or any kind of healthcare professional about your period pains?
Okay. I think, again, this is quite a sad one again, because I didn't actually go to the GP to discuss my pains. I went because I had started sixth form and I also had a problem with sort of heavy flow. Because, again, with fibroids, which is a condition where essentially you have non cancerous growths within your uterus or your womb. So again, they're sort of like little tumours, benign, which essentially obviously make you have heavy periods, painful periods, but also a lot of other sort of symptoms, frequent urination, etc.
Yeah.
And for me, I was struggling because we had a break and then we had a lunch break. And in both breaks, I'd need to go to the bathroom, whether it was to change my pad or to go to essentially the toilet.
Mm-hmm.
But I started realizing that I had to go more than that. And once I started sixth form, they kind of essentially got a bit more stricter. And every time I'd sort of asked to go to the bathroom during lessons, they wouldn't be too happy with that. And at one point, they essentially told me no. And they told me that I could only go if I had a health condition. And even after I explained that it was because of my periods and that I had to go to change my pad and other things, they essentially just told me that I should go to the doctors because it doesn't sound normal and it's also affecting my learning. Which is why I went, not exactly for the pain, even though I should have. And I think it was because I had already talked to other people who just told me to just have ibuprofen, use a hot water bottle, it will help. But it never did for me. So yeah, from then on, in terms of my GP, I did go a couple times. I feel like the first couple of times they didn't really take me too seriously. It's a bit hard to explain, but a lot of the times when I was explaining my symptoms, I think at the same time I didn't believe that it was abnormal, which is why I downplayed it. And obviously they just told me to have some paracetamol, some ibuprofen, and just see how that goes. And yeah.
Okay, interesting. And what sort of once you went to the GP for maybe your first consultation about it, did they offer you any sort of informative information about this, or?
Not really, not that I remember. Again, it's been quite a long time since then.
Yeah.
But I'm pretty sure my first couple of visits didn't really help too much. It was more saying, oh, it's normal. Again, you're quite young. And like a lot of people have like problems with their periods. It will go away over time. But once I realized that it wasn't going away, that's why I kept going back. And they did start giving me other medications and like treatments because I think that's when I started saying, okay, it's affecting my life. I can't go into school because there were points where the pain just got that bad. And I think that's when they started, okay, let's give you a stronger painkiller and see how you go. Because I've been having ibuprofen for a long time and it just didn't help. And alongside that, they gave me mefenamic acid and tranexamic acid. Mefenamic acid is just a painkiller, a bit stronger than ibuprofen. And tranexamic acid is a medicine that helps to reduce your period flow, essentially. So make your periods less heavy.
Yeah.
And again, I did try them. The tranexamic acid did kind of help. Again, it was more the fact that it would take a couple days to kick in. But the mefenamic acid just didn't help at all. And I was still kind of suffering in silence. But I thought, hey, one symptom's gotten better. This is good enough. And I kind of just went on with that until I think the pain just kept getting worse and worse, or it was just too much to deal with on top of all the other stresses of, again, starting uni and like increased workloads, which is why I kept going back. And they just offered a lot of other medications. But again, none of them truly took away all my pain or helped fix the problem. Again, they kind of diminished it, but it was just something that kind of kept continuing. Like I was given contraception, which even though a lot of people said it would help, for me it didn't have much of an effect. The pain was about the same, and all it did was regulate my periods, but it just didn't help me. And I was a bit frustrated at the time because I'd been trying all these methods and still nothing was really happening.
Okay. So did you, at that time, how did you process about like why you feeling that pain sort of thing? Because obviously at that time you weren't in medical school, you weren't able to learn that, disease and all that. You were quite young, so were you able to understand all of this in that time?
Again, I don't think I had much of an understanding. I feel like at one point is when I started like Googling all my symptoms, like most people do. And I was like, oh. And that's when I started actually getting really scared because I thought, oh, what if there's actually something wrong? Like that's when I was like, And once I started getting scared, that's when I started going to the GP and being more concerned and more adamant that something was wrong. Because before I was just mentioning, oh yeah, I'm getting pains. Oh yeah, it's, a bit heavy. I think I was downplaying my symptoms. But then after that, I kind of started to be more of an advocate for my health, to the point where I realized, okay, once I take myself seriously, the doctors are kind of taking me more seriously as well.
Yeah.
And they ordered like tests, blood tests, ultrasounds, etc., just to actually check like my iron levels or check if there's anything wrong. Because especially if a patient comes in with all these symptoms saying that they have very painful periods, very heavy periods, they want to see if there is an underlying cause. Because again, they want to rule out that it's secondary dysmenorrhea.
Yeah.
And for me, even though they did find that I was a bit anemic, I had some weird thyroid levels, again, certain hormone levels were a bit fluctuating. They didn't really find anything on my ultrasound, so they kind of just left it be again. And it felt even more frustrating for me because they had told me, actually, you have a lot of symptoms of PCOS, you have a lot of symptoms of this condition, maybe we should get you tested. And it felt like there was something wrong with me. But in the end, I just didn't get that validation because they hadn't have found anything.
Yeah.
Which was, yeah, a bit upsetting again. It just, a lot of emotions went through the whole diagnosis journey.
Yeah. And then you mentioned at the start that you said that you had fibroids as your secondary dysmenorrhea. So how did that become that diagnosis?
It was quite an interesting one because I've gotten quite a couple of ultrasounds before I was diagnosed.
Yeah.
And each time they never saw anything. But the one ultrasound that I did get, which actually wasn't for my fibroids or dysmenorrhea, it was actually because I was having a lot of bowel issues and they wanted to test for like inflammatory bowel diseases.
Okay.
And that's when they found out that I had fibroids, which was quite funny because at the time I was a bit confused because I had heard like from friends that her GP told her that she can only get an ultrasound to check for these like secondary dysmenorrhea causes when she was on her period. And for me, my GP didn't say anything about that. They just booked an appointment. I had to wait like 4 or 5 months, or maybe even 6 because of COVID, and just get it done. And what I found interesting was that the day that I got diagnosed, I was actually on my period when they did the ultrasound, whereas the other days I wasn't. So I don't know if that maybe was to do with it, the fact that obviously there's a lot of inflammation, etc. I was on my period, so maybe it had grown a bit or become more visible in a way.
Yeah.
But yeah, I found that quite interesting. Again, it was nice to know that there was something there that was wrong.
Yeah.
Because it made me feel a lot more validated for my pains and made me become more aware of the fact that I was very high functioning. And I don't know why I pushed myself to essentially go out all the time to keep up with my work, etc. Even though it was needed, I felt as though it almost burnt me out because I was pushing through the pain, gritting my teeth again, despite the fact that I actually had an underlying condition.
Yeah, I just wanted to like add in for people listening in. So normally when doctors think you have dysmenorrhea, for primary dysmenorrhea, they'll try and diagnose it based on your history of symptoms, as you mentioned, and just with a basic abdominal examination. And then for secondary dysmenorrhea, they will try and do an ultrasound. Although, as you mentioned, it might not always work out exactly how it's meant to go. And yeah, I think it's interesting. I think maybe, do you think it has anything to do with how, you know, how you said your experience didn't exactly match the definition in the guidelines for secondary dysmenorrhea? So maybe it, I'm not saying it was, but maybe it could have been that because you didn't match the definitions, they weren't immediately thinking about it, and it was only because you were so adamant that eventually they were like, okay, something's definitely wrong. And then they actually tried to like pursue it more.
An interesting one because in terms of the symptoms, I had a lot of the symptoms for fibroids. And when I got to a point where I was being serious and saying, actually, yes, this is what I'm experiencing, I think one of the main contributing factors was maybe my age. Because every time I would go, they'd say, it's normal for your age. You know, a lot of younger people have like fluctuations in hormones. It will get better, is something that I heard quite a lot. And I feel like something we need to understand is that there are a lot of teenage girls or young adults who do have period conditions diagnosed at early ages. And I feel as though that the reason why, because again, there's a lot of reporting done of these conditions at older ages, but I feel as though it's because it's not found at those younger ages because it takes so long to get diagnosed, especially with a condition like endometriosis, where you can't really get diagnosed through an ultrasound. You need to go through almost a surgical procedure where they put a camera to see sort of your uterus and stuff. And that, again, takes a lot of time, a lot of effort. And I think it's just so hard to find at early ages, like for me. Again, I feel like I was quite lucky to find it so early and be able to talk about my experiences. But I think definitely age is a factor that affects it.
So, in terms of treatments, I think we talked about it, like your experience with GP. So, other than, well, healthcare providers giving you some advice about maybe ibuprofen and stuff like that, have you had any like alternative therapies you've been using that helped you cope through some of the pain?
Ooh, I feel like I've been trying quite a few because I don't want to be too over reliant on medications.
Mm-hmm.
Because I know in the long run, it's not the smartest idea,
Yeah.
especially if you're taking a lot of meds in general. Or what if one day you don't have those meds at hand?
Mm.
It will really show, I think. But I've been trying out just like simple exercises, yoga, especially stretching.
Yeah.
Even if like you're unable to get out of bed, just doing some bed yoga. There's always videos that are accommodative to how you're feeling.
Mm-hmm.
So trying that out, or even just simple floor exercises just to relieve that pain, or positions that you can sit or lie in.
Yeah.
I think also diet helps a lot, especially since with periods comes a lot of bowel issues as well. You could have diarrhea, constipation along with that, or just in general really bad bloating, which can give you stomach pain.
Mm.
So of course, sticking away from foods that could actually aggravate that, definitely. And I've heard in a lot of cases that there are some articles which talk about having cruciferous vegetables or like leafy greens, and that having them in certain amounts can help to reduce period pains.
Mm.
Again, I don't know how effective or how valid it is,
Yeah.
but again, it's something that you can try out, which definitely won't have any harmful effects unless you eat really big quantities. But yeah, things like that. And just in general, I've heard a lot about medical cupping as well,
Mm.
especially in terms of periods. Well, dry cupping, since wet cupping uses like small incisions and then essentially uses these little cups to suck the blood out almost like through like a little pressure chamber.
Yeah.
But with people who have like heavy periods, it's not really recommended because fainting or anemia could worsen that. But there's something called dry cupping, which essentially it was almost like a massage therapy. So it's very soothing and can like promote blood flow to different areas, so away from the pain. So I've heard like a lot of like research about that, which is coming into the limelight nowadays. So I feel like that also is a good option. Yeah, there's so many different ways, and I feel like different people have different opinions. Some people might just stick to medications or just want only alternative therapies. Like again, it's just what works for you and what you find is best and accommodates to your lifestyle.
That's good. So in terms of, because we did cover a little bit on that at the start when I asked you about your condition, but in terms of your emotional or psychological impact of this condition, um, and your mental health as well, has that sort of affected your life a lot in terms of like when you started having your periods, obviously, and realizing that this condition is getting worse and worse? To what extent has it been affecting your emotional and mental health?
Again, a very hard question. I feel like with periods in general, women find different things can happen to them. Like for me, I realized only recently that I feel like I get a bit of premenstrual depression on my periods. So like maybe a week or two before, I might have like a bit of a low mood, some irrational thoughts. And again, that really plays with your mind. And I only actually realized that after sort of living with my cousin for a bit. So she essentially moved in with us and I stayed with her for a year. And she mentioned it to me. I hadn't even noticed. And she was saying, you know, you actually get a bit low every time, like around this month. Do you think it's sort of period related? And at first I was like, no, no, no. I don't ever get any like mood changes with my periods. But then slowly I started noticing the signs and the fact that it was like every month around my period.
Yeah.
And that's when I realized, wow, I didn't even notice that it was affecting me mentally. I wasn't aware enough. And to this day, it still affects me, but I'm glad that I'm just aware of it. Because now instead of thinking all these like sad thoughts or being quite irrational and thinking, oh no, this is happening, all these bad things are happening, I'm thinking, it's probably around my time of the month, which is probably why I'm having these thoughts. So I'm just more aware and I guess kinder to myself. But it's, again, very emotionally draining to deal with this. Essentially, every month, but it also just spans because it's not just during a week that you get these pains, these feelings, these thoughts. It's essentially all the time. It can span for the whole month. And I feel like for everyone it's different, but it's just something that you have to learn to cope with, sadly.
Yeah. So now that you know that you have an actual specific diagnosis for your secondary dysmenorrhea, how has this sort of helped you with your coping strategies, for example? Like, as you said, mood swings, you didn't even notice it before somebody told you about it. So how can someone who is maybe living by themselves be able to realize that and be able to comfort themselves in that way without people to, advise them?
Ooh. Again, that's a very hard one because for
Yeah.
me, if I didn't have my cousin with me to actually notice for me,
Yeah.
I wouldn't have ever recognized it. I think, in a way, it's just being so aware of yourself, of your thoughts, just reflecting on moments and just being educated. Because the more you know, the better the outcome, essentially. And in terms of coping and like methods that you could use, it varies for everyone, but I feel like just being kind to yourself. Like there are going to be days that you can't get out of bed, you can't function, you can't do these things, and you're going to be upset because there are other people who are able to, even on their periods, and you can't. But everyone's experience is different. Like I had a friend who literally had no period pains, didn't even know people could get pains on their periods. And when I met her and talked to her about it, I was so shocked. And I told her my experience, and for everyone, it's different. Your pain is valid, your pain is there, and your pain should be seen and heard. But in some cases, it's not. But if you see it and you hear it yourself, you can make sure that you're just looking after yourself, whether it's just something small like giving you some like self-care and having like just a day off to yourself to treat yourself, giving yourself some chocolates or just some, what was it, TLC, tender loving care. I love that.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think it's just being aware and accommodating for yourself. Because if one of your friends was in a lot of pain, you would throw everything away and just make sure, okay, give them meds, make sure they're comfortable, make sure they're okay. But then why wouldn't you do that for yourself, per se? Because again, you should be caring for yourself as much as you care for others, because again, you deserve that love and care.
And I think that's a very important message for our audience. So in terms of sort of the last section of our interview is to talk about any misconceptions about dysmenorrhea and this entire condition in general. What do you think can be addressed more?
Misconceptions. I feel like there's a lot in general, because especially with women's health, there are a lot of misconceptions in sort of treatment management, age, etc. Like I just found out recently, especially in terms of diagnostic tools, yes, they usually use standard ultrasounds, but there's actually transvaginal ultrasounds, which are a lot more effective and a lot more clearer in terms of its view when you do the ultrasound. But at the same time, in terms of actually giving it to a patient, it's quite hard to explain. But essentially, since the ultrasound has to go into the uterus, because it's kind of like a little camera, what happens is that they always ask the question of, are you a virgin? And a lot of the time, doctors almost sexualize that diagnostic. Because yes, in a way, it kind of makes sense, because if you have sort of something wrong with your hymen, which can make it harder for the camera to go in, yes, they don't want to be giving you that treatment. But a lot of the time, they almost assume that, it's hard to explain, but it's almost like they don't want people without a broken hymen to have this procedure when it doesn't matter in any shape or form. Because again, a lot of people think sort of virginity is like a social concept. And I feel like that's definitely something that isn't talked about enough. Because again, a lot more women could be getting diagnosed through that method if they consent to it, instead of just having the normal ultrasounds. And just in terms of dysmenorrhea in general, I feel like the main thing that isn't understood enough is the pain. I think that in general. Because again, yes, a lot of the time there are people who are still able to function in life, because a lot of people especially women, are high functioning. But especially when they're on their period and they're in pain and they're not able to move, a lot of people think they're lazy, they're not working, they're using it as an excuse. But in actual fact, it affects their daily life. They're not able to get up. They're not able to do the things that other people can do. And I feel like we need to make sure that we treat their pain as something that's valid and not normalize it. Not normalize it as something that all women should be able to actually experience every day and be able to function, carry on with their amazing lives. I feel like we need to understand that, yes, they need time off, they need adjustments. Because like other health conditions like diabetes, hypertension, again, they need time to have their medications to essentially adapt with life because it's a chronic condition. The same thing as dysmenorrhea, because you have that pain for a long period of your life and it does not go away. So yeah, in general, just we have to stop normalizing this pain. It is not normal. And we do need to make sure these people go to the doctors to actually get help, get advice, and get tested.
So I think the entire interview session, you were able to give like lots of valuable advice to everyone, especially in different aspects of as well, because you sort of experienced this yourself, which is really, really nice. And in one sentence, 2 sentences, would you be able to summarize a very important tip or advice for people who are experiencing like dysmenorrhea, just to sum it up?
Okay, in a couple of sentences, I'll try my best. Again, especially with these podcasts, we are trying to educate people. We can't be giving full-on advice because, again, we're not healthcare professionals. We can't give you all the answers that you're trying to find. But my best bit of advice is to stay educated, to be knowledgeable about your health, but also be your own advocate, especially when you are going to health professionals. Remember to make sure they understand this extent of your health. Because again, sometimes you may get dismissed, they may not hear you out, or there may be miscommunication, and we don't want that to happen to you. We don't want you to suffer or to essentially sit in silence. So I think one bit of advice would be to almost just make sure that you're just surrounded by people who can essentially get you to places. Because I feel like with my friends, they always made sure I was grounded, I was okay, I was looked after. But when times got tough, they told me reasonable things like, okay, you need to go to the doctors now. They will help you out. They'll give you tests, they'll give you ultrasounds. And if you need to, think of what you want. If you want to get tests, ask them for tests. But sometimes when you sit back and just get an appointment, they don't know what you want. So I feel like the best advice as well is to also make sure you have a set plan. Do you want this test? Do you want this ultrasound? What are you concerned about? Tell them everything that they need to know so they can make the most out of that information.
Thank you so much for your time today, and really wonderful to hear your stories. And I think a lot of people will be sort of enlightened about like your experiences as well, because they can relate to that. So thank you so much, Adila.
Thank you.
And that's a wrap for our first episode by the Dysmenorrhea Project. We've gained lots of valuable information today, and we're extremely thankful for our guest speaker who has shared her own story to us all. The sources used in this episode and links for further reading are listed in the description box.
We hope that you've enjoyed today's episode as much as we did. Please make sure to like and subscribe to our channel and follow our Instagram page for more future content regarding women's health topics. Looking forward to seeing you on our next episode. Bye!
Bye!